She sat at the altar in her dream gown, while I, the mother who paid for it all, watched from the fifth row. She didn't know my final gift wasn't money, it was freedom, not just hers, but mine. And when she opened that envelope, everything changed. The sun dipped behind the vineyard just enough to give everything a golden hue, like the world had been dusted in honey for the occasion. People buzzed with champagne and laughter, voices rising and falling like waves over a pristine sea of white linen, fairy lights, and expensive perfume. The wedding was beautiful. Of course it was. I made sure of that. I stood just beyond the last cluster of white rose arches, clutching a slim ivory envelope, my fingers sweating against its sealed flap. Inside was my final wedding gift. I debated for weeks what to write, what to give, and how much of myself to place between those folds. In the end, I'd chosen clarity, truth. But that clarity shattered the moment I looked at the seating chart. Front row, groom's parents, siblings, their spouses. Second row, extended family, uncles and aunts. Third, Delaney's godmother and her husband. Fourth, childhood friends. Fifth row, far right across from the sound tech booth, sandwiched between someone's nanny and the DJ's assistant. Carla Whitman, mother of the bride. For a second, I thought it had to be a mistake. My heart paused mid-beat, my mouth going dry. I squinted, tracing the laminated chart again, then walked over to the actual chairs. The placard was there, right where it wasn't supposed to be. 5 rows back, by the buffet table, practically an afterthought. I stood there, half in, half out of reality, the scent of vineyard grapes mingling with my Chanel number 5, now suddenly cloying. I felt eyes brush over me, quickly looking away. No one said anything. No one ever did. The photographer shouted, "Mother of the bride?" He didn't wait for a reply before snapping a shot. I turned slightly to the side, angling away from the lens. I didn't want this moment memorialized. My dress, a deep navy satin with hand-sewn beading along the sleeves, suddenly felt too heavy, too formal for someone now relegated to the background of her own daughter's day. I walked slowly down the grass-lined aisle, heels sinking into the earth with every step. The chairs filled up around me, clusters of pastel dresses and gray suits murmuring, laughing, clinking glasses. From my seat, I could see Delaney's in-laws up front, radiant and perfectly poised, as though they were the ones who had raised her, wiped her tears, held her through every storm. Delaney hadn't looked for me yet. I adjusted my shawl, plastered on a smile, and took my seat. 5 rows back, where the real stories never reached. My mind drifted, unbidden, to the first time she said the word wedding to me. She was 6, sitting on the living room carpet with her father's suit jacket draped around her like a bridal cape. "I'm gonna marry someone who loves flowers and hot cocoa," she'd said, "and you're gonna sit next to me the whole time, Mommy." I'd laughed, brushing her wild hair out of her eyes. "That's not how it works, sweetheart. You're the one who walks down the aisle. But I want you there, holding my hand." She used to want me close. I shifted in my seat, pretending to adjust the gift bag at my feet, the envelope pressed against my palm like it carried weight beyond ink. It wasn't money. Delaney had had enough of that from me. This was something she couldn't price out. Honesty. The jazz band started its prelude, and I saw her, Delaney, emerge from the grand French doors at the top of the vineyard steps. She was radiant, the kind of beauty people hush themselves for. Her dress clung to her like it was sewn from cloudlight. Her hair was twisted up in gold pins, and her lips carried that same shade of crimson her grandmother used to wear. My mother, the one who never thought I was good enough, the one who raised me to believe that silence was strength and that a woman's place was behind someone else's glory. Delaney looked nothing like me. She looked untouched by the bitterness that carved its way through generations of women in our family. She looked free, and maybe that's what stung most. When she passed the 5th row, she didn't glance in my direction. Her eyes were forward, her smile practiced. She took her place at the altar like she'd been born for it. The officiant began, voices hushed and reverent. I didn't cry, not when she said her vows, not when Brooks, her new husband, kissed her as if she were some delicate prize, not when the crowd rose to their feet, applauding a union they deemed perfect. I stayed seated, my hands folded in my lap, the envelope still gripped tightly. Around me, chairs shifted and emptied. People moved toward the reception hall for cocktails and cake, and I sat there as the sun dipped lower, painting the vineyard in a soft orange glow. Alone in the fifth row, the mother of the... It's strange how you remember smells from old apartments more than the layout. Ours was above a Greek deli in the west corner of town. Warm pita and onion clung to the wallpaper like it had a lease. That's where I lived when I found out I was pregnant with Delaney, 21, dizzy with morning sickness and married to Graham Whitman, a man who made promises sound like poetry. Back then, Graham could silence a room just by entering it. Not in a cruel way, at first. He had this presence, a kind of magnetic certainty that made you want to follow him. When he smiled at you, it felt like you were the only person on earth that mattered. And when he turned cold, it felt like that same earth could swallow you whole. He never yelled, never hit. He just rearranged my life so subtly that I almost thanked him for it. "You don't need to talk to Dana anymore," he said once, placing a hand on my shoulder like it was a blessing. "She fills your head with nonsense." I stopped returning Dana's calls. He'd lay out my dresses before dinner, always the ones that didn't show too much. "You look more elegant this way, Carla." And I'd smile and nod because anything else felt like disobedience. The first time I bought a lipstick he didn't like, bright red, the kind my mother used to wear, he threw it in the trash and said, "That's not your color." And that was the end of that. Pregnancy didn't soften him, it made him possessive. "You're mine and so is she," he said, pressing his palm to my stomach like he owned it. My belly was round and heavy, but my heart was hollow. Somewhere along the line, I'd stopped feeling like a person and started feeling like a piece of furniture, something Graham rearranged when it didn't fit the room. Still, when Delaney was born, I thought, maybe this is the moment that changes everything. She came out screaming, not wailing, not fussing, screaming, like the world had insulted her by existing. That tiny firecracker in a hospital-issued beanie stared at me with the intensity of someone who already had questions about how we ended up here. I looked into her blue-gray eyes and made a promise I couldn't keep. "You'll be safe. You'll never feel small." My own mother was cold, all elbows and silence. She had this way of cutting you down without raising her voice. "Be quiet," she'd say. "Don't be so emotional. No one wants a girl who talks too much." And if I cried, she'd go colder. "You're not a victim, Carla. You're just dramatic." I wanted Delaney to have more affection, more choice, more voice, but I didn't realize how my unhealed wounds would become her inheritance. The day Graham left, Delaney was 12. The three of us had just come back from a Sunday lunch with his boss's family. Delaney had refused to eat the asparagus tart and said it smelled like feet, which earned her a glare from Graham that could have frozen water. Back home, he exploded. Not loudly, not even cruelly, but with this slow, simmering disgust that felt like acid. "You've made her soft," he told me. "She doesn't respect anyone because you never made her fear anything. You're raising a selfish girl." Then he packed a single suitcase, buttoned his shirt like he had an audience, and walked out the door without saying goodbye to either of us. I sat on the floor of the hallway for what felt like hours. Delaney sat beside me, leaning her head on my shoulder. "It's okay," she said. "It's just us now." I smiled at her then, but inside I was screaming. The years that followed were a blur of late shifts, utility bills, and microwave dinners. I worked nights at the hospital, pushing linens and restocking supply closets, and came home in the mornings to find her already dressed, making her own breakfast. I'd leave notes in her lunchbox. "Proud of you. Love, Mom." But notes don't attend recitals. They don't hold you when your crush breaks your heart. They don't wipe away disappointment. I miss so much. Her first high school debate, her science fair ribbon, the night she broke her arm and called her best friend's mom instead of me. I told myself I was doing what I had to, that providing was parenting. But deep down, I knew I was afraid to be too present, because if I was truly there, she might see how broken I was. And then maybe she'd realize she deserved better. I bought her things to compensate: designer jeans, new phones, tutors. When she said she needed help with her college applications, I paid for a consultant. When she wanted to tour Ivy Leagues, I drained a savings account. It was always easier to give money than time. Less painful than trying to explain the ache of wanting to connect but not knowing how. And then came the summer of the burned journal. She was 17, off at a friend's lake house for the weekend. I was cleaning her room, changing sheets, dusting shelves, when I found them. Torn out pages stuffed in a paper bag, singed at the edges like she'd tried to burn them but didn't finish. The handwriting was hers. The pain was mine. I feel like a chore to her, a transaction. I get what I want if I don't ask for her time. She shows up with gifts, not herself. I wonder if she knows who I even am, or if she just knows what I cost. I sat on her bed and read every word, the pages shaking in my hands. In that moment, I saw it clearly. I hadn't broken the cycle. I'd changed the color of the bars, but the cage was still there. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go back in time. I wanted to be someone else, someone better. But all I did was sit there, holding ashes of truth, wondering if love in my hands would always leave a burn. There's a kind of distance that doesn't come with miles. It comes with polish, with ambition, with the way someone carries themselves like their past was an inconvenient fiction. That's what it felt like, watching Delaney grow up, like she was shedding everything that had come before, including me. By high school, Delaney had learned how to command a room without raising her voice. She had that Whitman poise, chin up, eyes sharp, smile reserved and strategic. She made straight A's without fanfare, could charm teachers and intimidate her classmates in the same breath. She was captivating and unreachable. I remember sitting on the bleachers during her debate finals, surrounded by other parents clapping and cheering. Delaney stood at the podium, articulate and cold, dismantling her opponent's arguments with surgical precision. When the trophy was handed to her, she didn't look for me in the crowd. She looked forward, always forward. By the time she left for college, her world had shape-shifted entirely. Her dorm room was beige and bare, barely personal. "I'll decorate later," she said. She never did. Her life became curated. Instagram filters, networking mixers, sorority socials. She was everywhere but present. Her calls home became shorter, her tone clipped. "Just busy," she'd say. And then there was Brooks. He arrived in her sophomore year, tall, confident, with an expensive haircut, and a voice like everything he said was a solution to a problem you didn't know you had. I first met him during a fall break dinner when they came home for the weekend. Delaney walked through the door wearing muted neutrals and diamond studs like she'd stepped out of someone else's life. Brooks extended his hand to me like a job interviewer. "Nice to meet you, ma'am," he said, with the kind of smile that looked more like a smirk. "Carla's fine," I told him. But the word ma'am clung to me like static. It wasn't respect. It was separation. Like I was a guest in a world they were building, not the foundation of it. That dinner felt like theater. Delaney corrected me when I asked if they were still sharing an apartment. "It's a condo, Mom. We don't share it, we lease." Brooks talked about his family's real estate legacy, his father's firm, the small cabin in Aspen. I nodded through the meal, refilling water glasses, smiling too much. Later that night, after Brooks went out to take a call, I asked Delaney if she was happy. She stared at her wine glass. "He listens to me. He respects my goals." "And do you love him?" She didn't answer right away. "I'm not 17 anymore, Mom. I don't need fireworks. I need a partner." Something about the way she said "Mom" felt like an accusation. I bit my tongue. I'd learned long ago that voicing concern only widened the gap. So I nodded, kissed her goodnight, and folded the throw blanket on the couch after she left. Months later, she called and said, "Brooks proposed." I braced myself, waiting for a pause that never came. "It's a platinum band with emerald-cut stones. Clean, elegant." Not once did she say the word love, just design, precision, logistics. I congratulated her. She said they'd already set a date, 16 months out, Vineyard Estate, California. "We're doing it right." I offered to help with expenses. I wanted to feel needed again. She hesitated, then relented. "You can contribute, but I need you to understand something. I'm handling this with Brooks. I don't need opinions or guilt, just support." No opinions, only payments. It wasn't a request, it was a contract, one I signed with my silence. I wired the first payment a week later, $15,000 for the deposit on the venue. When the planner sent me the breakdown, I scrolled past the numbers and stared at the title, Whitman Reynolds Wedding, VIP Package. Whitman Reynolds, like my name had become a placeholder, a historical footnote, no mention of Carla, no mother of the bride. The first time I was included in a planning meeting, it was over Zoom. I'd spent the night before researching flower arrangements and catering options. I had notes, ideas, questions. But the moment I joined the call, Delaney's face hardened. Mom, just listen, okay? We've already decided on most things. I listened for 42 minutes, smiled when prompted, nodded when addressed. When I brought up adding peonies to the bouquet, her childhood favorite, she frowned. That's not the vibe, Mom. Not the vibe. After the call, I closed my laptop and sat in the dark. That was the moment it hit me. I was funding a fantasy I didn't belong in. A week later, a thick packet arrived in the mail, stationery samples. Delaney had mailed them to me with a sticky note. Circle your favorite, not the pinks. The note sat on my fridge for 3 days before I circled a pale gray and mailed it back. Planning a wedding should feel like celebration. This felt like performance. Every meeting was a rehearsal for disappointment. Delaney's voice, once soft and inquisitive, had taken on an edge, like she was constantly bracing for conflict that I never intended. I sat through consultations and tastings, invited but not included. There were no warm smiles or shared glances, just clipped tones and narrowed eyes, as if my presence was a mild irritation she was learning to endure. The first time I asked about her vows, she looked up from her phone and scoffed. That's between me and Brooks. You don't need to weigh in. I'd only asked if she was writing them herself. Later that same day, I suggested incorporating a lace piece from her great-grandmother's dress. Something blue, something old. Delaney rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might tip over. Mom, this isn't your Pinterest wedding. Stop trying to make it sentimental. I swallowed my reply, nodded like I understood, and scribbled a reminder to send the next wire transfer to the caterer. That was my role now. Financier, not mother. Cassidy, her maid of honor, pulled me aside during the cake tasting. She spoke in a hushed voice, like we were breaking some unwritten rule. She's not like this with everyone, she said, glancing to make sure Delaney couldn't hear. Only with you. I didn't know whether that made me feel better or worse. She's just stressed, I replied automatically, the kind of line I'd used to defend Graham for years. But it wasn't stress. It was control. It was her need to dominate every moment, every conversation, and relegate me to a supporting role. And I let her. The florist noticed too. She paused mid-consultation, holding a bundle of blush roses, and said, "You seem more anxious than the bride." I gave a tight-lipped smile. "It's just wedding stuff." She nodded, but her eyes lingered too long. She saw more than I wanted her to. And then came the bridal fitting. I had been looking forward to it for weeks. I even booked the afternoon off and splurged on a fresh blowout. Delaney had looked so radiant in the photos she'd texted of potential dresses. I wanted to be there, to zip her up, to tell her she was beautiful. Instead, an hour before the appointment, she sent a text. "I think it'll be better if just Cassidy comes. It's a moment for friends." A moment for friends. I sat in the car outside the boutique anyway, watching through the frosted glass as they laughed inside. My reflection in the rearview mirror was a woman I didn't recognize. Flushed cheeks, smudged eyeliner, a forced smile that had nothing to do with joy. I drove home in silence. Didn't even turn on the radio. When I got there, I didn't kick off my heels or cry on the couch. I went straight to my laptop, opened my banking app, and wired another $4,000 for the venue's lighting upgrade. It felt like the only language we still spoke was money. Weeks passed. Rehearsal dinners, vendor coordination, place card approvals. All of it with the same energy. Cold efficiency. The Delaney I raised, curious, observant, full of stubborn fire, was gone. In her place stood a woman too polished to bend, too proud to break. And then came the mic. The videographer had been filming prep footage, Delaney in the bridal suite, champagne flutes clinking, bridesmaids curling hair and adjusting straps. I wasn't there. I wasn't invited to that part. He emailed me the raw footage by mistake, CC'd along with the planner for early review. I clicked through out of curiosity. The first few clips were standard. Makeup brushes, sweeping cheeks, laughter, fluffing skirts. Then came the moment that cracked something in me. Delaney, perched on a velvet stool, holding her mimosa with manicured fingers, smirked as one of the bridesmaids asked, "Is your mom gonna cry when she sees you in the dress?" Delaney rolled her eyes. "Please, she'll cry because she thinks it justifies the check she wrote." Another girl laughed. "She's been paying for everything, right?" Delaney shrugged. "She's a walking wallet. I say venue upgrade, she says, 'How much?' She doesn't even ask why. It's kind of sad, honestly." The laughter was light, easy, casual cruelty passed around like a canapé. I paused the video, sat there, staring at the frozen frame of my daughter mid-laugh, mid-mockery, a walking wallet. I didn't cry, not right away. I replayed it once more just to be sure I heard it right. Then I closed the laptop and walked to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. The tears came there, silent and angry, not just because she said it, but because it was true. I had trained her to see love in dollar signs, and now she was fluent. The suite smelled like roses and tension. I knocked once, then let myself in. The door hadn't been locked, a small mercy. The room was washed in ivory and gold, pearl curtains, champagne flutes half filled, the wedding gown suspended on a mannequin like a ghost of something sacred. Cassidy and the other bridesmaids had just left. Only Delaney remained, curled on a chaise with her phone, her veil draped across the armrest like she couldn't bear to touch it yet. She barely looked up when I entered. "I just wanted a few minutes," I said quietly, closing the door behind me. She didn't answer, just scrolled. I took a deep breath. "I saw the footage, the raw video from the bridal suite. I heard what you said." That got her attention. Her spine stiffened, but she didn't feign surprise. "It was a joke. You called me a walking wallet." Her fingers stilled on the screen. "People say worse." "I'm not people, Delaney." Finally, she looked up. "Why are you even here? To guilt me? Isn't this supposed to be the happiest day of my life?" I stood by the window, watching the dusk crawl over the vineyard outside. "You've made it clear I'm not part of your happiness." She rose from the chaise and crossed her arms. "You bought your way into my life. You don't get to buy my love, too." The words slapped harder than I expected. "I never tried to buy your love," I said, voice trembling. "I tried to earn it the only way I knew how, by giving you what I never had." She laughed, dry and sharp. "Money? That's what you never had? Number safety, choice, the freedom." I stepped closer. "I grew up with a mother who clipped my wings before I even learned to fly. Then I married a man who made sure I never left the ground." Delaney flinched. Graham's shadow still lived in both of us, even if we rarely spoke his name. "I didn't want that life for you," I said, "so I gave you everything I could, and maybe I overcompensated. Maybe I failed, but I did it out of love." She paced to the other end of the room, her bare feet silent against the carpet. "You say that like it absolves you." "I don't want absolution. I want to understand when exactly I became the villain in your story." Delaney turned. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with restraint. "You stopped being my mother and started being an investor. Every moment with you came with expectations, gratitude, performance. You didn't show up, Mom. You sent things." I let the silence sit between us. It was suffocating, thick with every unspoken word from years past. "I thought I was protecting you," I whispered, "from pain, from men like your father, from becoming me." "I didn't need protection," she snapped. "I needed presence." And there it was, the knife twist I knew was coming. "I didn't know how," I admitted. "I never learned how to show up without losing myself." We stood there, two women, both trying to survive the versions of love we were taught. Me, with my guilt and my fear. Her, with her polished walls and barbed defenses. Delaney finally sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded tightly in her lap. "I don't hate you," she said softly. I don't know how to need you." That broke me more than any insult ever could. "I think that's what scares me most," I said, "that I raised a daughter who believes needing someone is weakness." She looked up. "Isn't that what you believed?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Outside, the sun dipped below the hilltop. The shadows grew longer. I'm not asking to be your best friend, I said. I'm asking for the truth. Are you happy? Really? Delaney exhaled. I don't know yet. I nodded. It was more honest than anything we'd said in months. I'll still be there tomorrow, I said, even if I'm 5 rows back. She blinked. That wasn't supposed to happen. But it did. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. We just sat in that room, the past stretching between us like a battlefield, both of us unsure who won. But something shifted. Not healed, but seen. And that, for now, was enough. The reception was as lavish as I expected. Candlelight flickered against crystal, golden flatware glinted beneath hanging wisteria, and the champagne never stopped flowing. The band crooned soft jazz from the stage, the kind you'd hear in a rooftop bar overlooking Manhattan. It was the kind of evening people would talk about for years. Delaney and Brooks, the perfect couple, the perfect night. I sat in the 5th row still, my name etched in calligraphy on a place card, distant from the head table but close enough to hear laughter spill like wine across the linen-draped space. When the first dance ended and guests rose to toast, I stood, careful and calm. My heels were silent against the floor as I crossed the room. Eyes followed me, some confused, some sympathetic. Delaney, mid-conversation, turned and saw me approaching. I held out the envelope. She smirked, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You didn't have to do this, Mom. You already gave more than enough. I didn't say anything, just handed it to her. She glanced at it, expecting a check, maybe another financial flourish to cap off her day. Instead, she opened it, and for the first time all night, the mask slipped. Inside was a letter, handwritten on thick stationery, and a folded document. The deed to a small house in Millersbury, 2 towns away. My house, my escape. She looked at me then, confusion giving way to something deeper. I didn't let her speak. I gave her a soft, brief smile and walked away, back to my table, back to the quiet I'd grown used to. She stayed frozen, envelope in hand, lips parted. She wouldn't read the letter until later. She'd wait until the crowd thinned, the speeches ended, and the applause faded. But I knew what it would say. Delaney, this is not a transaction. This is a truth. I gave you my youth, my worry, my inheritance of silence. I tried to buy peace where words were too fragile. I failed more times than I'll ever confess aloud, but I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. And I realize now, you don't need my love packaged in sacrifices you never asked for. So this is my last gift. Not a check, but a goodbye. I'm moving into a home that is mine, finally stepping out of your spotlight. This isn't rejection, it's release. You are free. And so am I. Mom, I stayed for the rest of the reception, but we didn't speak again that night. She danced with Brooks. She toasted with her father's side of the family. She smiled for pictures, arm looped through Cassidy's. But occasionally, I saw her glance toward me, eyes flickering with something unreadable. I left before the send-off. The morning after, I expected silence. And that's what I got, until 3 days later when an email arrived from Cassidy. Subject line, "You should see this." Attached was a short video clip, grainy, clearly filmed on a phone. Delaney was alone in the bridal suite, the envelope in her lap, her gown half unzipped and bunched at her waist. The camera caught her face as she read the letter again, lips trembling. She wasn't posing. No audience, no performance. Her voice cracked on a whisper. Why does she always leave before I can apologize? She wiped at her eyes with the heel of her hand. Her expression wasn't just sadness, it was grief. Grief for something we'd both lost long before the wedding, something neither of us had the words to claim. I watched the clip once, then again, and again, and each time a different line from my own letter echoed back with new weight. This isn't rejection, it's release. I didn't cry, but I felt something shift inside me, like the first breeze after a storm. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. The air in the coastal town smelled different, cleaner, sharper, touched with brine and wood smoke. I moved into a modest 2-bedroom with faded shingles and sand lodged in the porch slats. The place wasn't much to look at, but it held no memories. That more than anything, made it priceless. Every window opened to wind and water. The sea was close enough that I could hear it from my bed at night, a low, endless exhale. I slept with the windows cracked, letting the salty air fill the empty corners of rooms I had finally chosen for myself. I didn't bring much from the old house. A few books, framed photos, most of which I later boxed up again, and the thick journal Delaney gave me years ago for Mother's Day, still half empty. I left behind the furniture she helped pick out, the dishes Graham once praised, even the framed cross-stitch my mother made, though I stared at it a long while before letting it go. Those first weeks were quiet, brutally so. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it confronts. No wedding emails, no calls, no texts. I checked my phone obsessively at first, sometimes 2 or 3 times an hour, hoping to see her name light up the screen, but hope started to taste like hunger. After a while, I stopped looking. I turned the guest room into a writing nook. Pale yellow walls, a vintage desk from a flea market. Lace curtains fluttered whenever the wind moved just right. I filled it with things I liked. No compromises, no one else's preferences. For the first time in years, I let my taste have the final say. I chose wild colors for the rest of the house. A tangerine rug, turquoise pillows, a teal kettle that whistled too loud but made me smile every morning. My mother would have hated it all. So would Delaney probably, but I didn't care. I was no longer editing myself to be palatable. I joined a local writing group after spotting a flyer at the town library. They met Wednesday evenings in the community center's sunroom, a circle of 10 people ranging in age from college students to retirees. I introduced myself simply as CJ, no titles, no family roles, just the initials that allowed me to write like I wasn't being watched. My first piece was about a woman who spent her whole life trying to speak in a language her daughter had already unlearned. The room went silent after I read it aloud. Someone said, "That's what grief looks like when it never had a funeral." I nodded but said nothing. I hadn't cried. Not that night. Not yet. Weeks passed, and I submitted a short essay to a regional writing contest, an anonymous piece about motherhood, control, and inheritance. When I got the email saying I'd won second place and a modest prize, I stared at it for a long time. The story didn't carry my full name, but it carried my truth. That truth became my scaffolding. Each morning, I woke up before the sun and brewed coffee strong enough to open old wounds. I wrote letters I never sent, poems I didn't edit. I walked along the shoreline collecting smooth stones and sea glass, listening to gulls bicker like old lovers. I cooked without recipes, danced in the kitchen to songs from decades past, and sometimes just sat on the porch letting the sea do the talking. But every night, as the sun burned its way down past the horizon, the silence from Delaney grew heavier. It settled on my chest like sandbags. I knew she was out there, living her newlywed life, possibly rereading my letter, possibly resenting it. I wondered if she thought about me while folding laundry, or if she hesitated before deleting old voicemails. Did she miss me, or just the version of me she could control? One night, a seagull thudded against my kitchen window. It startled me. My phone buzzed seconds later, an alert not from her. Just a local news update. But for a breathless moment, my whole body tensed in anticipation. I'd gone from craving her words to fearing them. And then one morning, there it was. A voicemail, time-stamped at 2:14 a.m. I played it before I could overthink. Her voice was cautious, quieter than I remembered. "Hi, I don't even know if this is the right number. I read your letter again. I think I finally get what you meant. I think maybe I miss you." The line went dead after that. No goodbye, no callback number, just static and breath and silence. I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to, but because I needed the silence to last just a little longer, long enough for it to stop being a punishment and start becoming peace. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, opened my notebook, and wrote a new title across a blank page, "When Distance Sounds Like Love." It began with one missed call, then another. The same unfamiliar number appeared twice in a week, always around midnight, as though she could only speak when the world had quieted down enough for her to hear herself. The third time, there was a voicemail. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the notification for 10 minutes before pressing play. Delaney's voice crackled through the speaker, tentative, unfamiliar in its vulnerability. Hi, Mom. I don't really know what to say. She paused. I miss you. I didn't mean it. Any of it. I just didn't know how to say thank you without feeling guilty. The message ended abruptly as if she'd run out of air or courage. I sat there for a long time, phone in my lap, replaying her voice in my head. It didn't sound like an apology, not fully, but it was something. A splintered olive branch wrapped in confusion and unhealed wounds. Days passed before the next one came. Did you really mean what you said in the letter? That you loved me, no matter what? There was a small exhale at the end, a sound I remembered from when she was a little girl, trying not to cry in front of her father. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't want to, but because I still wasn't ready to open that door. I needed to know she was reaching out because she wanted me, not just to silence her guilt. So I saved every message. I gave each one its own label. June 4th, trying. June 10th, soft. June 15th, almost honest. It became a kind of ritual, my way of processing her words without folding too quickly into the familiarity of codependence. Sometimes I played them while cooking. Other times I just stared at my phone, thumb hovering over call back, never pressing it. Then one morning something new arrived in the mail. An ivory envelope with no return address, addressed in blocky, sharp handwriting I hadn't seen in over a decade. My stomach turned. I opened it slowly. Inside was a wedding card, the kind you find in the belated section, cheap, generic, with gold script that read, "Wishing you both joy and forever," but it was the handwriting inside that stopped me. Carla saw the wedding in the paper. She turned out just like us. G. Graham. The name alone felt like a wound reopening. There was no phone number, no address, just that one sentence. She turned out just like us. I sat at the kitchen table, cards still open in front of me, coffee cooling untouched. I thought of how he left, blaming me for everything. I thought of Delaney, sitting in her bridal suite, mocking me with a smile that belonged more to him than me. I thought of her voicemails, asking if I loved her no matter what. And for a terrifying second, I wondered if Graham had been right. Had I given Delaney the worst parts of us both? The pride, the silence, the inability to show up without building a wall first? I put the card in a drawer beneath the old lease papers I hadn't gotten around to shredding. I didn't want it near the other letters I saved. It wasn't worth keeping close, but it wasn't something I could throw away yet either. Later that night, I listened to Delaney's first message again. I didn't mean it. I just didn't know how to say thank you without feeling guilty. There was so much of me in that line. The struggle to express love without strings, the ache of wanting to be seen while hiding behind performance, the shame of needing someone. I wasn't ready to call her, but I started writing again. This time, not about grief, but about inherited patterns and how we can choose, deliberately, painfully, to break them. I titled the piece, Unlearning Graham. The decision to start therapy wasn't dramatic. No breakdown in the kitchen, no sleepless night curled on the bathroom floor. It came quietly, like a tide I'd stopped trying to hold back. I was sitting at the coastal cafe I'd grown fond of, staring at the foam in my latte when I realized I didn't want to carry it anymore. Not the bitterness, not the old wounds, not even the pride. My first session was over Zoom. I didn't have the courage to walk into an office just yet. I told the therapist my name was Carla Whitman and that I was 51 and tired. Not in the physical sense, but soul tired. She asked where I wanted to begin. My mother, I said. It took weeks to peel back the layers, to name the disdain in my mother's eyes as emotional neglect, to understand how I'd confused Graham's possessiveness with protection, to admit that my silence had never been strength. It was survival, and survival had a cost. Each week, I scribbled down patterns in a notebook: love as obligation, affection as performance, silence as safety, and beside each I wrote, Delaney knows this too, because the further I traveled inward, the clearer it became. Delaney wasn't my enemy. She was my reflection, distorted through different years and better opportunities, but shaped by the same emotional blueprint. I didn't raise her to be cruel, but I didn't know how to teach her tenderness either. not the kind that survives beyond childhood storybooks. She inherited my fire, my defensiveness, my ache to be understood but never pitied, and she weaponized them, just like I had, first with Graham, then with herself, and then tragically with me. We were both fighting ghosts that didn't have names until now. One afternoon, after a particularly hard session, I sat on my back porch and looked out at the sea. The air was thick with salt and the scent of early summer. My phone sat idle beside me. No new calls, no new voicemails. That's when I knew it was time. Not to wait, not to react, but to reach. Not with guilt, not with regret, but with a possibility. I opened a fresh journal page and wrote, "Delaney, this isn't about the past. This is about who we could still become." And just like that, the letter began. I've spent most of my life carrying the pain of women who never had room to name their own. I've been trying to protect you from that pain, only to pass it down in a different form. But I'm learning, finally, that love isn't supposed to be inheritance. It's supposed to be chosen, renewed, remade. I don't want to rewrite the years, I want to build new ones with you, where we can both be wrong, where we can both be real, where we don't have to pretend we weren't hurt. You once asked if I meant what I wrote, that I'd love you no matter what. I do, still, always. But this time, I'm not offering it from 5 rows back. I'm offering it from beside you, when you're ready. I didn't rewrite it. I didn't second-guess the words. I folded it neatly and mailed it that evening with no expectations. The next morning, I told my therapist. She smiled softly, then said something I'd never considered. "You didn't break the bloodline with a confrontation. You broke it with an invitation." And for the first time in years, I believed that might actually be enough. The postcard arrived folded between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer. Plain white, a little bent at the corners, with my name printed in Delaney's unmistakable script. No envelope, no lengthy explanation. Just 5 words scrawled across the center in blue ink. Lunch, same bistro as my 10th birthday. I stared at it for a long while, the past pressing in around the edges. That birthday had been one of the good ones, before the quiet fights, before the resentment took root. She'd worn a tiara and ordered pasta with extra parmesan. She made me sit beside her instead of across, her hand small and sticky in mine as she opened each present. And now, here she was, drawing a circle back to that moment. Not an apology, not an invitation to rehash the past, just lunch. I arrived 15 minutes early. The bistro hadn't changed much, still a little too yellow, still playing soft jazz through ceiling speakers. I picked a table by the window, the one we sat at all those years ago, and ordered water I barely touched. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. No makeup, no curled hair, no curated smile. Just Delaney, tear-streaked, dressed in jeans and a plain black hoodie, her wedding ring catching light as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She paused when she saw me, then came over slowly like each step was a question. "Hi," she said. I nodded. "Hi." She sat down. We didn't touch, didn't reach, just breathed in the shared space of old memories and new uncertainty. The waitress came. We both ordered, safe choices, light salads we barely touched. Silence stretched between us, not cruel this time, just shy, like we were both trying not to scare it away. Then she said it. "I'm scared I'll turn into you." The words weren't laced with venom. They came out fragile, as if she'd rehearsed them, feared them, and finally surrendered to their truth. I looked at her for a long moment, then replied quietly, "So was I." A pause, and then surprisingly we laughed, not loud, not long, but honest. A laugh stripped of performance. It cracked something open. A door maybe, or a window we'd both sealed shut years ago. She picked at her napkin, eyes wet again. "I didn't know how to love you without hating myself." "I know," I said. "I didn't know how to love you without disappearing into it." We weren't poetic, we weren't eloquent, we just were. Two women wounded by the same legacy, fumbling for something that could hold the weight of who we used to be and the space for who we might still become. "I got your letter," she said. I nodded. I read it 3 times. I didn't ask what she thought. I didn't need to. Instead, I said, "Thank you for showing up." She looked away, biting the inside of her cheek. "Cassidy gave me the video." I blinked. What? The mic footage of me, what I said, what I didn't say. Her voice cracked. She said I needed to hear myself. I didn't know how to respond. My heart beat faster, part of me aching to defend, part of me relieved I didn't have to. I sounded like him, Delaney whispered. Like Dad. I swallowed. We both did. I hated you for being silent, she said, and then I hated myself for being loud. That's how it starts, I murmured. That's how the bloodline stays unbroken. She finally looked at me. Then let's break it. Simple, firm, like a vow. We stayed for another hour, talked about neutral things, books, the sea, her work. We didn't rehash the wedding. We didn't talk about the front row or the letter or the years we'd lost. We didn't have to. The space between us had changed. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. Can I call you sometime? She asked. Yes, I said, whenever you're ready. We parted with a hug, brief, unsure, but real. As I walked back to my car, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for decades. We weren't healed, but we had started. We didn't rush. After the lunch at the bistro, there were no grand declarations, no sudden revival of daily texts or holidays spent arm in arm. There were just small steps, cautious ones. We began with phone calls, short, polite, sometimes stilted. Conversations that started with weather and headlines but slowly, cautiously, bent toward emotion. It was strange at first, to speak as women, not as roles, to pause before answering, to mean what we said instead of just surviving the dialogue. She visited for the first time 2 months later, a weekend trip. I vacuumed the guest room 3 times, baked blueberry scones with a recipe I'd found online. The same ones I used to burn in the early days of the coastal house. When she arrived, there was no awkward hug, just a quiet, lingering moment in the doorway, like both of us were trying to memorize the version of each other we hadn't met before. We set boundaries, clear ones. I won't pay for your life anymore, I told her the first evening as we sipped wine on the porch. That includes emergencies, upgrades, and guilt-covered favors. She nodded. And I won't disappear when I'm hurt. I won't punish you with silence. We both exhaled. It was harder than it sounded. I had to unlearn the reflex to reach for my wallet when she mentioned stress. She had to learn that showing up didn't mean surrendering control. Some weeks were better than others. Some calls ended too fast. Some texts went unanswered. But the space we built was real, slow, imperfect, earned. She started therapy in the fall. Her voice changed after a few sessions, not in pitch, but in posture. Softer, more measured. She began saying things like, "That's not mine to carry, and I'm learning how I've internalized things." Once she called just to say, "I realized I treated you like the mirror I didn't want to look into." I nearly dropped the phone. She didn't apologize all at once. It came in fragments, awkwardly, unevenly. A voicemail that said, "I regret what I said about the money." A card that read, "Thanks for staying when it would have been easier to walk away." Each piece was its own offering. One Saturday, I invited her to my writing group. She almost said no, but curiosity got the better of her. We sat in a circle of folding chairs, sunlight pooling on the wooden floor. I read a new piece titled Daughters Who Inherit Fire. It wasn't about her, but it was about us. I didn't look at her as I read. When I finished, the room was still. And when I finally turned, I saw her face streaked with silent tears. No embarrassment, just release. "Why didn't you share this with me before?" she asked in the car ride home. "Because I wasn't sure you'd see me," I said. "Not the version you built in your mind, just me." She reached for my hand at a red light. Didn't speak, didn't need to. We were beginning to know each other without armor. No more rehearsed mothering, no more practiced daughterhood. Just 2 women, learning, shedding, choosing. That night, over dinner, she said something I never expected to hear. "I don't want to undo the past. I just want to live a future we don't regret." I nodded, holding back tears. That's all I've ever wanted. The pew creaked slightly beneath me as I sat in the very last row of the chapel, soft light pouring through stained glass windows and settling like mist on the oak floors. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood polish. People around me whispered and laughed gently, the kind of reverent warmth reserved for ceremonies not of obligation, but of choice. Delaney was renewing her vows, not out of tradition but intention. 3 years had passed since the original wedding. 3 years of slow healing, of therapy, of unlearning. 3 years of turning the word family into something not defined by blood, but by effort. She had called me 6 months ago to tell me about the renewal. "We're doing it differently this time," she'd said. "Just 50 people, no spectacle. Just meaning I asked if she wanted me to attend." She didn't hesitate. "Of course, but you get to choose where you sit." So I did, the last row. Not because I was unwelcome, not because I was overlooked, but because I finally understood that my value as her mother wasn't measured by proximity, but presence. I wore a deep forest green dress. No corsage, no flashy jewelry. Just me, comfortable in my skin, whole in a way I hadn't been the first time I watched her walk down an aisle. The music began, simple piano chords echoing under the vaulted ceiling. Brooke stood at the front, looking less polished than he had on their wedding day, and far more human. He looked nervous. It made me like him more. Then she appeared. Delaney stepped into the light wearing a dress nothing like the first. Softer, simpler, sleeves billowing like something out of a dream. Her hair was loose this time, the wind playing with it as she walked slowly, deliberately. She met my eyes halfway down the aisle. She smiled, and then, just the smallest of nods, not a grand gesture, just a quiet acknowledgement. "I see you," it was enough. She reached the altar, took Brooks's hands, and as the officiant stepped back to let them speak their vows, she surprised everyone. She paused, turned slightly toward me. "I wasn't planning this," she said, her voice strong but shaking a little. "But I need to say something first." The room held its breath. "To my mother," she said, "thank you for walking away when I needed you to. Thank you for not chasing me when I wasn't ready. And thank you for being there when I finally came back." My throat closed, my vision blurred. I didn't cry from grief. Not this time. I cried from release. The moment washed over me, not as a peak, but as a soft wave that took the weight I'd carried for so long and gently set it down. They exchanged vows, tender, humorous, real. There was no show, no performance, just two people choosing each other again. And a daughter choosing to see her mother as something more than a shadow of mistakes. After the ceremony, guests mingled under twinkle lights strung through the chapel courtyard. Delaney found me near the refreshments table, her cheeks flushed, her eyes still bright with emotion. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, wiping under one eye. "You meant it." "All of it," she said, "and more I still don't know how to say." We hugged, not cautiously, not as a symbol, but as two women who had come through the fire and decided to stay. Later, as the evening quieted, she handed me a small box wrapped in soft ivory paper. Inside was a necklace, a tiny pendant shaped like an open door. "It reminded me of you," she said, "of what you gave me." And I knew what she meant. Not money, not a wedding, not forgiveness even, but space. Space to grow, to return, to rebuild. And I too had chosen a door, one that led back to her, not as a daughter who owed me redemption, but as a woman who had found her way. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been the one left behind, or the one who had to walk away to survive, don't scroll past. Share your story in the comments. Let's talk about the quiet heartbreaks, the unspoken wounds, and what it really takes to heal. Because sometimes the most powerful love story is the one where you finally choose yourself.